Hello friends, welcome to Coding Garden with CJ. In this video I'm going to be making a tier list of front-end framework libraries, specifically single page application libraries and frameworks. Now, there are a lot that are not pictured here. Let it be known, there are a lot, and I probably left some off, but in my experience as a developer, being out in the world and building apps and seeing the different things, these are the ones that come to mind, and I'm going to list them out. And also it's going to be a bit of a history lesson because I have these roughly in order of when they were released. So we have JavaScript, the thing that all of these things are written in and transpiled down to. We've got Knockout and Backbone. We've got Angularjs, Ember, React, Vue, Mithril, Riot Js, Marco Js, Angular with a capital A, Svelte, Mavo, Stencil, Lit, HTML, and Alpine JS. And specifically why I chose these is these are all libraries and frameworks that are written in JavaScript, or like written in TypeScript and transpiled to JavaScript, but it is JavaScript code that's running on the front end, and they are typically allowing you to create components. They're allowing you to construct a UI. They're allowing you to take application state and represent that in the components on the page. And that's why I've included these here. Now, there are other things like Next.js. I'm not including it because ultimately it's server-side rendered, and ultimately it is just using React. What are some other things people mention, like Gatsby? I'm not including it because ultimately you are just writing React code. What else? Yeah, so we're not talking about Blazor. Honestly, I'm not familiar enough with it, but I do know that you're writing C#.NET code. You're not necessarily writing JavaScript code. So yeah. All of that said, there's still going to be a ton of you that write comments, and you're more than welcome to. But okay, let's start it. We're going to start off with JavaScript, which really doesn't even belong in this list because it's all written in JavaScript. But just for the sake of things, let's look at the initial release of JavaScript, which was in 1995. So JavaScript was introduced. And we'll talk about these, but these came out in what, 2013? Let's look at Knockout.js. It was initially 2010. So Knockout.js was initially released in 2010. Backbone was initially released in 2010. How many years after? Okay, so can we do math? It's 10. 25 years later. Is it 20? Is the answer 20? Is it 15 or is it 25? It's 15? It's 15. Okay, yeah. So JavaScript is introduced 15 years later. People start doing weird stuff with it here. Cool. But I'm just going to place JavaScript on the S tier. You can't beat it. I mean, the thing is, like, typically you wouldn't just write your application in JavaScript. Like, all these other things exist for a reason. They provide utilities, they provide value so that you don't have to write as much code with JavaScript. These things potentially keep your code bases organized and your components organized, but still JavaScript. It's JavaScript, so it's going to be S tier. S stands for Supreme, which I learned today, and then we have the lower tiers here. So it's God tier is what it is. It's above S tier, but that's all we got, so we're going to put it there. All right, next up is Knockout.js. So Knockout, if you haven't heard of it, was released in 2010. This was one of the first. Now, like I mentioned, there are probably others that came before it, but this is one of, like, when I was getting into professional web development, this is one of the ones that a lot of people were using. And it's interesting. I'll say that. Let's look at their website. We can take a look at how the syntax looks and such. But here are the key concepts. It has declarative bindings, automatic UI refreshing, dependency tracking, and templating. What's interesting about this? So here we have a view model of tickets. So we have an array with 3 tickets: economy, business, and first class. Knockout introduced this idea of observables, the idea that you could have some variables and some state, and then have a UI that automatically updated when that underlying state changed. And back then, that's how they did it. They literally, you'd have to create a specific observable that you could then modify And that's how the UI know that that thing changed so that it could actually update. And so that's the thing. It was a lot more manual, right? Like these days, I say that, but then like in React, you are using like set state and stuff like this. So it's a thing. Let's see if I can find some other examples. Oh, it's a tutorial. I don't actually want to do that, but let's just look at this first tutorial example. So this is what your template would look like. First name, last name. We then have a view model that has a first name and last name property. And then we apply the bindings of an instance of that view model. And so right now it's hard-coded. But if we want to actually get the values from the view model, we use this data bind attribute. So let's try it. So instead of to do, we'll remove that. And we'll give it a data bind attribute of text first name. Let's take a quick stretch. Two-way data binding was all arrays. Yeah, we'll talk about Angularjs in a second, and that was another thing that basically allowed you to do this, but with a lot less code. And developers like a lot less code. Cool, so basically what this says is take the value from my model here and apply it to that specific element. We can do the same thing. Yeah, this was 2010. We're currently in the year 2010. We can do that same thing right here, but bind it to last name. All right, if we run it, look at that. We've got Bert and Bertington. So obviously there's a lot more to knockout, but this is like the basics of it. Okay, where's it going to show up on our tier? It's hard to like put it in detail. Like if we're analyzing this from the perspective of today, if you're writing an application with a single page application today, you probably, and you're starting from scratch, you probably shouldn't use knockout. So that's why I'm going to put it in D tier, but I'm tempted to put it in S tier just because none of these other things would really exist without things like knockout or even backbone. Like we would not be doing the things we did today had they not laid the groundwork. I'll adjust my tiers as we go along. It's the ancestors, yeah. So that's knockout. Let's take a look at Backbone, which was released around the same time. So knockout came out in July of 2010. If we look at Backbone, it came out in October of 2010. So just a couple of months later. And let's take a look at their website. No one in their right mind would use knockout. Yeah. Let's do it. So introduction, models and views. Yeah, it's interesting to like see these diagrams because the thing is and this is also why I've categorized all these things in this way, is they all work in a very similar way where you have some model that is your data. Like it could be called state. Sometimes it's called data. Sometimes it's called the view model. Ultimately, it is just data. And then you somehow map that data to your view, the thing that your user is seeing. And then there's some mechanism for changing that data, which then updates the view. That's how all of these things work. For some of them, that's like a gross simplification of what's really happening, but ultimately they all work this way. That's why I've grouped them all together. Yeah, and this introduces the model. So orchestrates data and business logic, loads and saves data to the server, emits events when data changes. The view listens for changes and renders the UI, handles user input and interactivity. So that's great. Can I see an example? History. To-dos. Oh, do I have to go look at the source code? Oh, I just want to see a model. Okay, let's see if this is a good enough an example. So models are the heart of any JavaScript application, containing the interactive data as well as a large part of the logic surrounding it. Okay, so we do model.extend. We're giving it a property, which is prompt color. I guess this is more so like a method. And then this dot set is like setting an internal model value. So it's setting the internal color to be that color. Yeah. So we create a model. We create an instance of that model. That model has a property called color. we can set it initially to white, and then when we call this function, it can update that color. I do have merch. Yeah. If you do !support, you should get some links. Let me know if not. Okay, I was hoping we could just see some examples. Oh, that's another interesting thing that Backbone does is API integration, where you can basically specify a base URL, and it has built-in methods for calling that API to get your data into your models and stuff like that. It was one of the first to do that. I think with Knockout, you typically would just have to use something external to Knockout. Bad docs D tier. Yeah, I think like Knockout doesn't really, I could be wrong, could be totally wrong, but I think Knockout doesn't necessarily care where your data is coming from. You could just use whatever you want to get your data in, but ultimately you're applying it to models, whereas Backbone includes functionality for making HTTP requests and stuff like that. Okay, we can't find a good example. We're gonna knock, if we go from that perspective, we're gonna knock it down just because I can't see like how do I make a basic hello world? I don't know. Like I said, we might adjust this. Let's move along. Enters Angular. This was, I think, also in 2011? No, also October 2010. They were released 7 days apart. So Backbone came out, and then Angular was like, wait. Have I got a show for you? So Angular really changed the game. I really do want to show you some examples of like Angularjs. So not Angular 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Anything before Angular 2. This absolutely influenced React and Vue and any of these other frameworks here. Angular took all the nice things that Knockout and Backbone were doing. With like the idea of like a view model and automatically updating the view, and then just made it so that your code was extremely simple. Let's see. Yeah, so you put ng app, and now all of the HTML is enabled as an Angular app. It has these directives like ng model. This is how we do two-way data binding. So on this input, you're saying that I have some state variable. In Angular, it's called scope. I have some scope variable called your name. And whenever I type here, that should be synced with that scope variable behind the scenes. And then they are using handlebar syntax to render that in the template. So these two things sync together. So as I start typing, this is two-way data bound to the property your name behind the scenes. And then here we're seeing the latest value of your name. Like this. Yeah, that's it. Thank you. that's my merch store. This does require some JavaScript. So you would write your template like this, and then you would have a controller, and your controller is where you would specify your scope variables. Actually, no, I think you could do this. You technically could do this in Angular 1 with no JavaScript. I think that would just work. Yeah. But once you want to start introducing like custom methods and custom things happening, you would introduce a controller. And so, for example, you create a controller, your to-do list controller, you initialize your data, you have some functions like add and archive, and then you can use those things inside of the HTML. And happy Saturday to you, Electrothermal. Yeah, I guess I got more excited about this because I used Angularjs for a very long time. Before I ever used Vue or React, I like this is the first single-page application framework that I actually used, and it's pretty awesome. Now, there are things that are not great about it, and one of them being it is very easy to basically create global variables. To basically think of it like, I mean, the thing is, in modern single-page applications, you actually do have global state, like because you have the Redux store or the Vuex store, and that's technically like global state. But there is a nice way of managing that state and getting that state into your components. In Angular, you would do this with like services, and a lot of people just never learned how to do that, and then instead they would just modify the root scope. So with Angular, it is very possible to have global state, but not do it in a nice way. So this is why I'm gonna also put this like in C tier. Because I mean, I guess just because of the fact that it's like the founding father of everything, I'm gonna bump it up. So like when I started learning Vue Js, everything to me was so familiar because I had already written Angular. But Vue changed the way things were happening behind the scenes, and made it easier to write better code that like shared data across components and stuff like that. Oh well, I'm gonna give it a B tier. Also, this is all I probably should have mentioned this at the beginning. This is all objective. You probably might not agree with me here, but this is just this is what I'm saying. All right, let's talk about Ember now. Ember. Subjective? Yes. No, this is subjective. No, it's subjective. You're right. Yeah, I said the wrong thing. Not objective, subjective. This is subjective. This is all my opinion in based on my experience. You have different opinions and different experiences. So yeah, Ember came out in 2011, about a year later. What's interesting about Ember is it came from the guy who made Ruby on Rails, Yehuda Katz. And if you've ever worked in Ruby on Rails, which is a backend framework, let's see, Ruby, didn't he make it? Rails? Ruby, is that the wrong person? Cut. No. So this is the original offer was David. I think Yehuda Katz was at least on the team, right? Right? I don't know. I could be wrong. Scratch that. I mean, I'm not going to edit this, but Yehuda Katz has something to do with Ruby on Rails. I'll say that. Regardless, I don't even know why I started going down that path. If you've ever worked in Ruby on Rails is extremely opinionated. So if you look at a Ruby on Rails code base, it has a very specific folder structure. And you can put things in folders and they automatically get detected and you can automatically use them. The other thing about the Ruby language itself is there are a lot of just like built-in helper methods that you don't see, like just built into the language that usually in other languages you would need external libraries and stuff like that. All of that to say, Ember.js was very highly influenced by that. So the interesting thing about Ember is it's extremely opinionated. So it works in a similar way that it allows you to do data binding and stuff like that, but they basically have opinions about everything. They have opinions about where you should put your controllers. They have opinions about, they even have initial opinions about what data should look like that's coming back from a server, which is a weird thing to have an opinion about, but ultimately it makes it so that you can create front-end models for your data and stuff like that. All of that to say, because it's opinionated, I'm actually going to give this A tier. And the reason being is that it's so much harder to write bad Ember code than it is to write bad code in any of these other frameworks. Okay, so let's read this, what Milo said. One of the creators of Ember, a member of the Rust core team, and retired member of the Rails and jQuery core teams. Okay, yeah. Cool. So, I was sort of kind of right. Yehuda Katz has something to do with Ruby on Rails. And what's up, Arca? Welcome to the stream. Okay, so all that to say, now I will say, because it's so opinionated, that's why people don't like it, because you basically have to learn its opinions, and that may make your development experience not as great. But what I'm saying is, from a developer perspective, like for somebody who's trying to learn about all this stuff and you have nowhere to start and you have no reference, Ember provides the guardrails. It's like it's the bumpers in the kids' bowling lane, right? Like it sets you up for success and has a lot of opinions and makes it a lot harder to do things wrong. Whereas, I mean, I could argue that in most of these other things, it's really easy to do things wrong if you don't know what you're doing. So that's why I'm giving it A tier. Let's keep moving. Next up is React Js. Actually, I'll look up React, which came out in 2013, and we'll look at Riot Js, which came out. Did we figure out when Riot Js came out? Ember is the plastic knife front-end frameworks. I mean, I think that's discounting it a little bit because it's very powerful. It's the plastic Swiss Army knife. Let's say that. I don't even know what I'm searching for at this point. I guess I was just gonna look at the release date because I totally forgot what it was. And actually, I didn't even do this. Let me show you some Ember code before we move on. I realize that I'm a bit scattered here, but it's fine. Let's just look at some Ember, so I can show you what I mean. And the other thing is, because there are so many opinions, there is an extreme amount of documentation. Like you basically. I mean, I typically say the same thing for Vue Js, but when you're learning Ember, you just go to the docs because everything is there. There's absolutely everything you would need. Yeah, this is still YouTube content. Okay, let's look at the concept of components. Templates are HTML. So this would be the example of your component template. And then you've got some CSS, but you can see the folder layout. So app/style/app.css. That's where those CSS is going to go. And then this is app/templates/application.hbs. So it's going to expect that your templates are in that specific folder. And then if we look at components, yeah, basically they took all this HTML and split it up into pieces. So instead of application.hbs, we now have received message.hbs. And so this is like one specific section. This is a component. And so all of that piece that was in the larger HTML before, that gets pulled out, and now we can just use that component right there. Same thing with sent message. All of that gets pulled out, and now we can just use the sent message component. Message input, new message input. And so ultimately that one big component that was a lot of stuff is broken down into multiple things. Now, I will say with all of these other ones that we talked about, it's possible to do that as well. Like you can do that with Angular and these others, you just have smaller and smaller components. What I want to see is how they do data binding and pass data into their stuff. Component arguments and HTML attributes. Yeah, so they use like a variant of handlebars. You can see here, in this case, they want to take the title value, which is on some data, and apply it to that attribute, and take the initial value and put it as the inner text of that element. But you can see the variables that we're referencing from the model have the @ sign on it. Yeah, and it looks like there's a shorthand for it. So instead of having to do this, you can also shorthand it with just like @title. So that's cool. Where do they talk about model? Ember data. Ember data is how they define models. So that was like your view and your template. If you want to actually define some state or some data, you define a model, and that goes in the models folder. You can define what are the attributes of that model. And then you can have like computed properties for the model. But basically, by having a model like this, you can then use it inside of a template. Okay, that's enough showing of the code, but that is Ember. Should I talk about Riot Js? Or React first? Yeah, I mean, that's why we're talking about all of this, Plurudo. Oh, you got it! It's a animated emote. Yeah. What am I doing? I think I wanted to see when Riot Js was introduced, because I mean, if you look at it, it honestly looks very similar to Vue Js. Okay, let's just talk about Riot because we're already here. So this is a simple and elegant component-based UI library. This came out in I thought we I'm gonna have to look it up. November 2013. Okay, but it could have been a little bit earlier. Yeah, we just want to make sure that we're in the Riot repo because that's the documentation site. But if you go to Riot and then you go to the Riot library and then we go to releases, we can go back even more. Before 1.0.0. Yeah, so I've got November 2013. And React came out in May 2013. So technically, React came out first. But let's take a look at Riot Js. So you can create your custom components. This is defining a to-do component or to-do element. You can see in the template, it uses just single curly braces to like render data into the template itself. It has some nice things like each, which lets you repeat an element. And then it has this syntax like item in items. It's got state. This allows you to, I actually don't know what the pound symbol does, and how that's different from this. Maybe this is saying that this is an expression rather than just a property reference from the model. Yeah, so you have that, and then you have your script embedded here. So we have our state, and then we have our methods, which can operate on that state. If you've ever used Vue Js, this probably looks very similar, except that it's not actually using handlebars. But it's interesting. It's very interesting. Where would I put it? I honestly don't even know. Let's go C tier, just because we're gonna go B tier. Honestly, I haven't even used it, but we're gonna go B tier because it looks fine and it looks like Vue. And if you know me, you know that I like Vue, and so it gets high just because it looks like Vue. It's gonna get higher on the list. And also, what I like is on their homepage, I was at least able to explain at a high level how it looks and works. So to me, that's nice. It's going B tier. All right, let's move from there. Now, the big boy, the one that most people use anyways, aside from the fact that all this other stuff exists, is React. So React was introduced in 2013. It's made by Facebook. You can look at their website. And this is what your stuff looks like. So there's this language you have to learn called JSX, which basically allows you to embed HTML inside of your JavaScript that at the end of the day gets transpiled into function calls, react.createElement. So technically, you could write React without JSX. Your code would just be littered with this. But as you can see, this is not very developer friendly. Like, it would be really cumbersome to write react.createElement div text content, react.createElement li, react.createElement whatever else. That would be really cumbersome. So they introduced a new language called JSX, JavaScript and XML, I think, something like that. But it basically allows you to write code like this that gets transpiled into code that looks like this. But at the end of the day, if you look at a React app, it's going to be written with JSX. But your code looks like this. So you have your component, which can either be a class or a function. It has a render method that returns what will be shown for that component. And then you can have props, which are data passed into that component. And also you can have state variables, which can be modified and shown in the UI. And also if they change, we will see the latest value in the UI as well. Yeah, so someone's asking why is Angular rated so low? My answer is rewind the video. But this is Angularjs. This is the initial Angular, and I'm rating it low because it's very easy to write bad Angular code, and that's why what gives it a bad rap is developers have experience being in a code base that doesn't have good data management practices, and it just modifies the root scope everywhere. And also, people writing Angular didn't understand how the what is it called? The so in Angularjs there is scope, and there is the process for which in which it like determines if values have been updated. I forget what it's called. They're not observables. We're talking about Angularjs here. The digest loop and the digest cycle. Yeah, so that's a thing. But there are, I mean, this goes the same for people writing writing apps in these other frameworks as well. They're using them, but they don't necessarily understand how they work under the hood. And in Angular, there's this thing called the digest cycle, and that's how Angular determines to update your view based on if the data changed. And if you don't understand that cycle, your app's going to be slow. You're going to write things that are modifying things, causing the digest cycle to run too many cycles. You're going to write templates that are showing values that should have been just a one-time bind instead of a multiple-time bind. There are ways to write an Angularjs app correctly that would work just fine, and that is not slow. But if you don't know about those things and you don't learn about the digest cycle, then it's really easy to write a bad app, which is why I'm giving it B tier. But Angularjs has a special place in my heart. It's one of the first ones that I used, and Vue Js took huge influence from it as well. Yeah, so if you remember from Angular, if you ever had to do $apply, that's kind of like dot force update in React. You're basically saying, hey, some stuff has changed, so please re-render things, or please rerun the render cycle to determine if things in the UI should update. Yeah, okay. React. I will be honest, I don't like React. I don't like it. I don't like it at all. It's way too it overcomplicates way too many things. The ecosystem is crowded. There's way too many opinions. There's not a lot of cohesion. A lot of people just that I come across in the React ecosystem seem to be just people that like to write complicated code for the sake of complicated code. But just like everything else, it's possible to write good React code, and when you see some good React code, you feel good about it, but it's also possible to write really bad React code. But I'm putting it as S tier because there are the majority of places in the world are hiring for React. Like if you want to get a job, you probably should learn React. So that's why I'm putting it at the top. But there's a lot of reasons that I don't actually like it. It's S-tiered because of peer pressure and because it's just the way the world is. All right, let's move on to Vue. This is God tier. We're going to introduce a new row here for God tier. Basically, if you're doing anything, you should be doing it in Vue. We're modifying our grid just so that we can create a God tier. No, and I'll explain why. Because so many, like, this happens really often on the stream where people come in just like, why do you like Vue more than React? I will tell you exactly why. Tell you exactly why. Here we go. Got ourselves another line. Done. God tier. Okay. Or V for the Vue tier? I don't know. It's above in a V, or it's above and beyond everything else. It's in its own category. Now, let's talk about it. Let's bring up... So we mentioned React JS came out in May of 2013. Let's take a look at when Vue came out. February of 2014. So, wait. May 2013? So 6 months later is December, and then 2 months. So Vue was released 8 months after React. It's not that much younger than React. This was Vue 1. Vue Js 1.0 was released in 2014. But the way you make apps and the syntax of the components hasn't really changed much since Vue Js 1. What has changed is the underlying implementation. So we're getting into the details, but Vue Js 2 introduced the virtual DOM, which made Vue a real contender for being like a serious front-end framework that people might actually choose instead of React. I don't know. I'm very rambly in this video. We really didn't even talk about the virtual DOM. React introduced this idea of the virtual DOM. It's nothing amazing. It's just an object. And when it needs to update the actual DOM, it traverses the tree of this object and compares it with what the new tree should look like, and then makes any changes based on the differences. That's all it is. And it's really slow. It's faster than if you were to just replace the entire HTML page every time the view updated. But it is... I don't know. Let's what do I want to talk about here? Oh, here's an interesting thing that is totally unrelated, but if you'll notice, the code names for all of the Vue Js releases, first of all, what do you all notice about the version names for Vue, the Vue releases? So Vue Js 0.9 was named Animatrix. 0.10 was named Blade Runner. They are anime, but what else? I mean, it's actually pretty obvious if you look at it. They're anime in their alphabetical order. That's it. So every release has had an anime name, which is pretty fun. But yeah, somebody mentioned that F is missing. That's also, wait, why is Blade Runner? Oh, because, wait. Yeah, F is missing because Vue.js version 1. I think they were going to reserve that for version 1.1. Because like I mentioned earlier, from version 1 to 2 is when they introduced the virtual DOM, and like the underlying implementation, a lot changed under the hood in that bump. But they still were maintaining support for version 1, so they were reserving F for like 1.1 or something like that. And I think they were going to do like Full Metal Alchemist or something like that. I don't know. What do I want to talk about here? Let's talk about the fact that there's actually a code sample on Wikipedia. I guess I didn't see any of the other examples. I don't know. Let me see if I could just pull it up on. Oh, I don't want to watch a video. I want to see the code. Cool. Check it out. All right. So you've got a template. Your template can use handlebars. We've seen this multiple times before, but this basically lets us specify, hey, we have some data and we want to render that data right here inside this template. And then you can have an app. You also have components. In these examples, they just have apps. Here, it has a message property. And basically what this is saying is let's show that message property here. And that turns out like this. You see that hello Vue thing. But want to see something amazing? If I say app.message equals, wow, Vue is V tier, the page just instantly updates. That's one of the beautiful things about Vue. You'll notice that I didn't have to call set state. Didn't have to do anything special. This app detected that message change behind the scenes, and this automatically updated here. Now, you could probably do a very similar demo with all of these other things. They just all have their caveats of how you actually get it to work. But as you can see here, this was just a simple property set, and it instantly updates. There are other things like bindings. Yeah, if you want to do loops, or actually, no, so this is conditionals, like you can hide or show an element. These other things have something similar. If you want to loop over elements, they have a directive called v4. If you remember earlier when we were looking at Angular, they had ng4, so Vue very much was inspired by that here. What else do I want to say? Yeah, that's mainly it. I don't know. I've talked a lot before why I actually prefer Vue, but there's a lot of reasons. The main thing is Vue typically requires a whole lot less code than React. With React, let's say you're using hooks, you'd have to set up like your state variables, and then you have to learn about hooks and like what the hook thingies do. And then if you want to update it, you're going to have to call the function to actually update it. Whereas this is a very opinionated video. Whereas in Vue, like I showed you, just update the properties exactly. The other thing is most Vue.js apps you come across in the wild, whether you're like working for a company or like open source projects, they're pretty similar and pretty easy to get up and going with, because they all use similar things. Like we could probably do another tier list on global state management, but Vuex is typically what we use in Vue for global state management. This is very similar to Redux if you're in the React world, but this library is maintained by the core team. And pretty much every Vue app you come across, if it's using global state, it's using this library. Whereas like in the React ecosystem, there's many different options. And when you come across a React app, it may or may not be using Redux or some other library or something like that. So I like the fact that most people are doing the same thing in this specific ecosystem. There's a lot less opinions and a lot less time wasted on trying to decide what's better or what we should use over the other. What else? Yeah, I mean, I like the fact that Vue has computed properties just built in, and it makes your components more performant by default. Let's look at, computed properties and watchers. So in their example in the docs, like let's say you are rendering the reversed version of some data property on your template. Now, we've talked about this before, Freebly, use memo. You can use use memo, but 80% of React developers have never heard of use memo and don't know how to use it and don't know when to use it and complain about when their render functions are, I don't know. But in this example, you can see that we have an expression embedded here. And basically what would happen is anytime the message property changed under the hood, this would have to recalculate. And actually, anytime the function re-rendered, it would have to rerun this expression. And so the idea is, instead of having this code embedded in your template and having that code need to rerun on every template render, you can instead create a computed property, which basically has that logic inside of it. But Vue is smart enough to only rerun this function if the properties that it is dependent on change. What's nice about this, you don't even have to tell it what it's dependent on. It has automatic dependency tracking. And then inside of your template, you can just use it the way it is. Yeah. Yeah, and Freebly is an experienced React developer kind of talking about that. Like, that's the other thing is, like, there are a whole lot of other libraries that you would typically use with React. So in this case, they're using GraphQL, and then you're probably using, like, Apollo, and then Apollo has its own, Apollo GraphQL client has its own caching layer, so like you can create computed properties in there and stuff like that. So this would not be use state in React. I mean, technically you could replicate it with use state. You could replicate this with a use state and a use effect in React. You also could replicate this with a use memo. I don't know. What am I talking about? Why is Vue better than React and all these other things? I guess I've talked about it before. I think at this point you probably don't even want to listen to me anymore. But I like Vue. Vue is nice. It's simpler. It's just simpler in general. Let's keep moving. Actually, I'm going to breeze through the rest of these because the rest of these, really except for Svelte, I don't have much experience with. We've got Mithril. I'm going to give Mithril C tier. You can't see it. You can't see it. It's black. I'm going to put it as C tier. It's going to go right here. Let me show you real quick what Mithril JS is. Ninja. It's the Ninja framework. It's really interesting because it's kind of like if JSX never existed in React, in a way. I'll show you if I can find an example. Yeah. So let's say you want to build a tree of DOM elements. You would do something like this. So like this is a list of elements. We have an H1 element that has the CSS class title with the inner text of my first app. We have a button element that has the inner text of a button. And so this basically says those two elements are the child of an element called main. Or this is an H1 element that has a class. Yeah. So it's very like low level. You're not writing JSX. You're not writing in a template. It's all kind of just JavaScript, which really, I mean, is it's not horrible. I think there are some things. Yeah. You can use you can use a Babel plugin. So they have a Babel plugin that would let you do like a JSX style thing, but that's that. So that's interesting. Your components can have a view function, which is that. And what else? Oh, it has like built-in routing. I guess we haven't even talked about routing. Ember has built-in routing. React you have to use a separate library. Vue has a library maintained by the core team that you can use for client-side routing. Angular has built-in routing. Riot, I think you would need to use an external library. I don't know. Mithril. You look at this though. In terms of performance, it has a small number. What does that mean? I don't know. Also, in terms of size, it's a whole lot smaller than these other things. You also don't have the best developer experience. So I don't know. I'm going to throw this in the C tier. I guess I already did. It's cool. I don't really know what this introduced that other things weren't doing. other like libraries weren't doing, but yeah, we're gonna throw it there. All right, here comes Marco JS. Is it on Wikipedia? It's not. So I believe this comes from the eBay team. I'm saying a lot of things that could be totally wrong. Just don't trust me. Look up all the things I'm saying. But it's like HTML and JavaScript had a perfect baby and it grew up to be awesome. So this is Marco. Let's see what it looks like. So your template would look like this. This is how you do a repeated element. So we'll say for color of some array of colors. So this is going to repeat this list item for every color. We can dynamically bind the style attribute, and then to render things out, it's actually using like the JavaScript template literal style syntax with the $. Yeah. So this is what your template would look like, and then if you do need some JavaScript, it would look like this. So you have lifecycle methods, you have internal state. So when it's created, create some internal state. We have some methods that can modify that state. And then your element template can be within, like right below the JavaScript code that makes it interactive. And so that works just like that. So it's pretty interesting. Did we see when it was released? Like technically it came out a little bit after Mithril, these others. Let's see if we can find some other examples. Rendering. I haven't heard of Polo.js. Also, I missed a ton of chats. Let me just catch up really quick because I realize I've just been talking. Let's see. Saying Vue is better than React is like saying Epic is better than Steam. Because like Epic is a game engine. Steam. Are you saying it's like comparing apples and oranges? Because I don't think it is. Do I think it's worth being a freelance developer in 2021? Yeah, sure. You can make a living. Yeah, I mean, I think that's why some people like React so much, is that it is mainly just JavaScript syntax. And if you know JavaScript, you could figure it out in React. But I argue that there's a limited number of new things in Vue. You've got your directives like v-for, v-show, v-model, v-on. There's a few of those, but I argue you can learn them. And it's not a lot. It's not like 100 of them. It's a memorizable and learnable amount that once you learn them, you can use them. And what else? The fact that it uses like handlebars instead of like a weird, like not weird, but it's like the JSX syntax of getting data rendered inside of an element. To me, like that is not natural. It's a very weird syntax to do that in React. Whereas in Vue, it's very straightforward to just use handlebars and put some data properties inside of it. I don't know. I argue that if you at least just spend a week with Vue, you'll learn pretty much everything you need to know about it, and you won't have to fiddle with it. Like, yeah. Nice, Alka. Yeah, so Alka is saying his code for Overseer looks like Mithril. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I mean, this is the React code that we end up with these days, is like a ton of use effects and random stuff. Yeah. How do you learn new stuff like framers? Looking at their documentation and then sometimes looking at their source code. Yeah, Nuxt is next for Vue. Yep. For those who are professional web developers, how do you learn new stuff? Yeah, I think it varies from person to person. I personally just go to the documentation for the thing. I actually don't really watch many tech videos or tutorials. I kind of just figure it out. Oh, Marco Polo. I see. I see. All right. What do I even want to say about Marco? I don't know. I think it's... I saw a demo of it live at one of the Denver JS meetups, and I remember being extremely impressed, and now I can't remember why. 10 awesome Marco features. Let's look at it. Shorthand attributes. Tired of constantly typing out class and ID attributes? No need with Marco. Simply utilize the shorthand. Cool. All attribute values are just JavaScript. Unlike with HTML, you're not limited to string attribute values when using Marco. Attributes can have types. Interesting. Isomorphic UI components made it easy. Tired of boilerplate code and trouble managing component input and state? Marco makes it a breeze to develop self-contained, individually testable components. All right. Concise syntax? Cool. Yeah, I mean, I do like this attribute thing because you don't have to do curly braces. You don't have to do double quotes. You just literally set it to the thing. If you think about it from a framework perspective, they actually wrote a like custom language parser to be able to parse code like this into a component. So that's interesting. It seems like a weird parsing, an interesting parsing problem because you basically everything after the equal sign has to like match up. I don't know. It's cool that you can do that, but I imagine it's a pain to actually implement under the hood. Concise syntax. Cool. So we have a button with the on click, call increment, and then yeah, looks great. Import JavaScript modules. Cool. No need to require import because it will implicitly import. That's interesting. Implicitly imported components. Use JavaScript to set CSS classes and styles. Yeah. I mean, you get this in a lot of other things, just like class or style binding. Okay. I'm going to give it B tier. Let's keep moving. All right, we've got Angular. It's just going straight into D tier. And I'll expand on this. But let's talk about Angular. Capital A, Angular. Let's talk about why. And it's because there's a history behind it. It's not just that like, oh, it's hard and I hate it. Let's talk about it. So we already talked about Angularjs. This is the one that was released back in like 2010. It's the foundation for all these other things. Vue is heavily influenced by AngularJS. We would not be where we are had AngularJS not actually come out. Okay, so let it be known. AngularJS, it's amazing. Now, Angular 2.0, I think got its initial release in 2016? 2016, I want to say. Angular 2. Let's just say 2016-ish. So in 2016, the team at Angular decides we're going to rewrite the framework from the ground up. And it's going to be better. We learned a lot. We learned a lot making AngularJS, and through the years, we've learned a ton. So we're going to do it again, but this time we're going to fix all the things that were wrong with AngularJS, and we're going to make it great. They rewrote it from the ground up, but they basically created an entirely new and different framework. It is nothing like AngularJS. The only thing similar is the logo, and you can see that even the logo is like slightly similar. This has a gray outline. This one doesn't, but they're technically different. The thing that I have the biggest gripe with is basically how they introduced it, because so many people that were building AngularJS apps are like, all right, I want to upgrade to Angular 2 now. Well, you basically have to rewrite your entire application. You can't just there's not a very easy upgrade path. You have to learn all of these newer concepts. Angular initially was like using like reactive extensions, wasn't it? I think that was like another new thing where like you, yeah, there were like RxJS was introduced. I don't think you have to use it necessarily, but it is a whole lot of extra concepts. The other thing is you basically went from AngularJS, which was just totally front-end JavaScript. Like back then, you didn't even need a build tool. You could just have a bunch of JavaScript files that brought in the Angular library, and you built your app. This Angular, whole new system, whole new beast. You didn't have to, but the docs were written in TypeScript, and to build your app, you had to use TypeScript for the most part. Technically, you could do it without it, but you would kind of be on your own because the docs weren't written with it. And that means that you need a whole build system. You can't just like go from the old way of just running it directly in the browser. You actually do need a build process now. You potentially need to learn TypeScript. and all of that. All of that to say, like, basically this was a complete and totally new framework that had the exact same name. And because of that, it confused so many developers. And because of that, they just had a really bad marketing problem. And I haven't gotten over it. It's been, what, 5 years since then? And I still really haven't used or touched Angular much since then. I think if they would have called it something completely different and framed it that way, they would be in a way different boat than they are today. Now, I will say, and actually we're going to bump it up to C tier, mainly for some of the same reasons that I put Ember in A tier, because it's extremely opinionated. Angularjs was like a little bit opinionated, but you still could put your files wherever you want. As long as they were imported in the right way, they would all just work. Angular has a lot of opinions about where you put things, and how things work and how things should go. Please center the logo right there. And that, I think that's a good thing, because it encourages good developer practices, and you'll come across more code bases that have good development practices because of that. And actually, we're going to bump it up to B. You're going to B tier. Go to B tier, yeah. Because of that, because like a similar reason to Ember. So I think if you're starting a project from scratch and you like TypeScript, you like organization, you like opinions, you don't want to use Ember, maybe you should use Angular. So that's that. But Angular and I have a very long history, which is why I don't like it that much. It's yeah, I don't know. All right, we're going with Svelte. I'm actually going to put Svelte on the same tier as Vue, and we're going to call this the G tier for God tier. And here is why. And let's talk about Svelte for a second. So, Angularjs, yeah, this one is I think they had end of life, end of last year. Where basically they're not going to release any bug fixes or have support for it anymore. Yeah. Vue is God tier. Vue is at the top. Okay. I mean, here's the thing though. Honestly, I think I would prefer Angular over React. Like, now that I'm really thinking about it with like bringing all this other stuff up, because the other thing Angular has going for it is everything is built in. They have an HTTP client built in. They have routing built in. They have, okay, here's what we're doing. Angular is going to S tier and React is going to A tier. Yeah. Am I going to do that? Angular went all the way from D tier to S tier. No, okay, we'll put them both as A tier. That's what we're gonna do. Yeah. We're going A tier. All right, let's talk about Svelte. So Svelte was released in 2016. It's created by Rich Harris. And here's like the interesting. Here is the interesting progression of things, because I talked about this earlier, but Vue is heavily influenced by Angularjs. Like all of the attributes and everything like that, heavily influenced. But they made it their own thing, and then eventually they introduced like the virtual DOM behind the scenes. And it's a new and great thing. And now even in Vue 3, they've introduced like the composition API and stuff like that. But what I want to mention is that Svelte 1.0 basically looked exactly like Vue Js. Like if you looked at if you looked at a Svelte component and you looked at a Vue component side by side, you probably wouldn't be able to tell the difference between the two. So Svelte took a lot of its ideas from Vue as well, because the organization of things in Vue is very nice, and they put a lot of thought into it, and it was a good way to do things. So Svelte was inspired by that. But where Svelte is different is Svelte does not use a virtual DOM. It just does direct DOM updates. We'll see what they say on their website. No virtual DOMs. Svelte compiles your code to tiny framework lists of vanilla JS. Your app starts fast and stays fast. Here's the thing to think about with all these other frameworks. When you're building an app with them, you need to bring in their JavaScript code. You're bringing in the runtime. So you're bringing in the Vue Js runtime, the Angular runtime, the React runtime, the Ember runtime, the Backbone runtime. You're bringing in the code that for that specific framework so that your app will work. And it works that way with pretty much all of these. So when you're shipping a website, that website has the source code or the transpiled code, minified code for the library itself in the website. So Twitch is written with React. You're looking at this Twitch chat right now. You have a copy of the React.js library running inside of your web browser right now. That's a thing. Where Svelte is different is whenever you transpile or compile your code, there is no runtime. It basically turns it directly into vanilla JS. Of course, it has some utility functions, but it turns it directly into vanilla JS that's it. There is no Svelte runtime. There's no Svelte code. It's just running directly in the browser. And what's nice about that is it is extremely fast. You don't have things like the render update cycle with the virtual DOM that you have like in Vue and in React. It will literally just have DOM code that says element that text content equals value when some value changes. So it's literally just updating the DOM directly. And I mentioned earlier, and I kind of was joking. I don't think I made it clear that I was joking, where I was like, well, React uses the virtual DOM, and the virtual DOM is actually slow. I say that because for the longest time, that's why so many people were like, oh, React, it uses the virtual DOM. It's so fast. It's not actually fast. It actually performs a whole lot of extra work to figure out whether or not the DOM should actually be updated. Whereas Svelte, it doesn't even go through that process. It's just direct. The code is directly there that says whether or not a thing should be updated. So that's why Svelte is also God tier. I'll say one major difference between Svelte and Vue is that Svelte doesn't necessarily have the same ecosystem that Vue has because it hasn't been around for as long. So the community isn't as big. There aren't as many I just read your message. There aren't as many community packages for getting things going. But I think at the end of the day, Svelte, and I guess when was version 2 released? Maybe like 2 years ago. But Svelte has basically learned the lessons of all these other frameworks and took the best of all of them and made it even better. Why did Vue devs change their virtual DOM? No, I think technically their virtual DOM implementation was faster than what they were doing in Vue 1. But I think, to be on the same, considered in the same world as React, I think switching to the virtual DOM was good for them. Yeah. But, so, yeah, I don't use Svelte that much. But here's the other thing that also makes this God tier. If you go to the Svelte website and you just click on examples, literally everything you would ever want to do with Svelte is right here in the browser. And you can write your code here. You see the update on the right. But what's nice about the latest Svelte is the idea that your template and your script and everything all exist in the same file. Actually, that happens with Vue too, but this is, I don't know, a little more integrated, I guess. It does have its own syntax for putting variables from your state into the elements themselves. In this case, it's just using single curly braces, but you'll see if we're specifying attributes. I guess those do use curly braces. There's some other scenarios, but here's the interesting thing. And one thing that I like about it is when you are defining your state variables, you're actually just defining them as variables. You're literally just saying, I have a variable called name, and it has the value worlds. You don't have to say this is data. You don't have to say use state. That's it. You just declare a variable, and then it automatically becomes a state variable. It's a beautiful thing. And I think this, ultimately, to me, this is the goal of a lot of these frameworks, is to make it extremely easy to build interactive applications, right? To not have to worry about the specifics of observables and models and just write code and then the code just works, which I think Svelte does really well. So let's look at an example of We just got rickrolled. Dynamic attributes. So we have a source variable with the image location. We have a name. And yeah, okay, so this is like combining actual state variables with some other values. Yeah, we got rickrolled. Yeah, so your styles are just a style tag. You can have nested components. Where's yeah. So this nested component is rendered inside of there. What else? You can render literal HTML strings if you'd want to. Yeah, so this is where reactivity is when we're actually like modifying state. Yeah, so how does it do reactive state? So we have a variable called count. We have a function called handle click that just literally modifies count. That's all it does. It doesn't have to say set state. It doesn't have to do anything special. It literally just modifies the variable. That automatically triggers the DOM manipulation code that updates this variable, and you're done. So that's it. You can also, in some cases, you might want to create, these are basically like computed properties. So you want doubled to always be the current value of count times 2. So if count ever changes, store that back into, let's take a stretch. I've been talking a lot. Store that back into the doubled variable. And so they have this special syntax. I mean, technically it looks like a JavaScript label, like a go-to statement. But it's not actually that, because Svelte is actually its own language, even though it looks very, very similar to JavaScript. But basically what this says is I'm creating a computed property called doubled that will always be the latest value of count times 2. And same thing with quadrupled. And then you can just use them in your template like this. Yeah, and you can also have reactive statements. So whenever count changes, this if statement is going to run to compare it. And if it's true, then the code inside of it will run, which will actually like update the variable. So count is dangerously high. Okay, so here's the one gripe I have about Svelte is how you do iteration or repetition. So we saw like in Vue they use v4. We didn't show it in React, but React they use map, like JavaScript map. Some of these others have like their own directives. Svelte uses each blocks, and it makes me sad. I mean, it's fine, but the syntax is kind of weird, and I can like never remember it. I always have to go back to the docs. But I'm just thinking, like, because they had to write their own language and processor anyways, couldn't they have come up with a better way to do this than having to do? The other thing is like conditional rendering. So like else if blocks also take on this syntax, which I do not like. But it's fine. It's fine. Yeah. Yeah. And then for global state management, that's built in. Is it it's not their context. What's it called? Yeah, and yeah, so it's definitely check out Rich Harris on YouTube. He did rethinking reactivity is a good one. He basically just burns React and talks about how things in React are just an abstraction leak, and I don't know. Whoa! Jason actually had Rich Harris on his show. I didn't know that. That's awesome. That's awesome. But yeah, look at his videos. They're super entertaining. Yeah, so it's opening with a pound sign and closing with a slash. It's weird. Does anybody know what it's called for the global state stuff? Svelte store. The Svelte/store module exports functions for creating readable, writable, and derived stores. Keep in mind that you don't have to use these functions to enjoy the reactive store syntax in your components. Yep. So you can create a writable store, subscribe to its changes. I don't know. I haven't really used it, so I don't know. I guess this technically would give you global state because you could define these readable state values in like some other file and then just import them. So I don't know. Okay. that's enough of that. All right, we're gonna go really fast. Mavo. I said we were gonna go fast earlier, and then we got stuck. But I only learned about Mavo because a friend of mine did a meetup talk on it. But what was really interesting to me is the fact that there was very little JavaScript in the solution itself. So if you look, for example, at like a to-do list, this is all the code required for a to-do list. You can like add tasks. It has like this special syntax for rendering values in your template. You can specify an action which will do a thing which operates on your data, and you can specify what the storage is. I don't know. You'd have to learn more about it, but what's interesting is this is all the code that's required. I mean, obviously there's like CSS behind the scenes to make it look nice. But ultimately, you don't even really have to write JavaScript code. I think another interesting example is, like in this case, where it's specifying the storage is this. So, wait. Is that not even a thing? But I think it's like, this is basically an example of an API request where you could specify where that data is coming from, and then you can just use that data elsewhere. I think that demo was like broken, but it was really interesting to me. I'm going to give this C tier just because it's interesting. I really don't know of anybody using it in production, but it has some interesting concepts in it. All right, we got lit HTML. I'm going to put this as S tier just because is the future. It's the future. So first of all, we can talk about web components. So web components is an actual feature set built into web browsers. So like if I look at caniuse.com, web browsers actually support the web components or custom elements specification. So all these browsers, except for IE, literally have code in them that is able to render and allows you to create custom components. Now, when we think about it, at the end of the day, all of these frameworks, what they're letting you do is create custom components. And I mean, all of them are letting you do that just with JavaScript. But I guess the web standard, the W3C, the World Wide Web Consortium, the Web Standards Committee saw that this was what people were doing. And so they actually added something to the specification that just natively supports the idea of custom elements or custom components. Let's see if we can see an example. Web components. Using custom elements. Here we go. So this code you can write in any one of these web browsers that supports it. You don't need to bring any external JavaScript, no library. You can just do it directly. That's what we mean when we say it's built in. So you can say, I want to define my custom component called word count. It's going to use this word count class, which extends the HTML element. And then you can define the custom functionality of that specific element. So this is custom elements and web components, and it's a thing. These other frameworks aren't necessarily using that under the hood, except for lit HTML and Stencil. I'll also, I don't really even know Stencil. Actually, because it uses JSX, I'm going to give it B tier. Go B tier. But both of these are similar in that they're higher level libraries that help you with writing web components. And so if we take a look at lit HTML, we can see how it works. So in this, what's also interesting about lit HTML is it works on what's already built into JavaScript. Because it would allow you to write code that uses this tagged template literal called HTML that automatically creates basically a render function out of your plain old JavaScript template string that uses variables. Yeah, so it is a templating engine, but you can use it along with I guess yeah, that's just lit dev. Let's look here. Let's define a component. Yeah, so define a custom element which extends lit element. It has reactive properties. Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, this starts to look like JSX, but it is not JSX. It is a tagged template function that just is a template string inside of it. And you can actually install like editor tools that will render that as like what HTML elements should look like. I don't know. I don't know too much about it. Seems fine. And then Stencil is a very similar thing. But they do allow you to use like JSX to define your components. Honestly, this tier list took way too long, so I'm just gonna go. But next stream, we're gonna do C#.NET stuff. Goals and objectives of Stencil. What else? State components have state. I mean, also it uses decorators. I really, really, really don't like decorators. I think obviously like decorators at the end of the day are really just like passing the thing below them into a function with that property. But I don't like them. I don't like them at all. So it's going to stay B tier. But Stencil is very similar to lit HTML in that it allows you to create web components. Last on the list we have here is, does anyone remember what this is called? It starts with an A. Alpine Js. And honestly, I've never used this, but I looked at their homepage and it looks pretty cool. So you bring in Alpine, you define like this. What's cool, what's interesting to me about this is there's no JavaScript in this example. It's literally just your template. So you define some state or some data, and then you have attributes that can do things when things are clicked on, and then you also have other things, like directives is what they would be called in Vue or Angularjs. Honestly, this kind of just looks like Vue without the JavaScript. Let's dive in. What else do we get? Listing for events. What about calling an API? Alpine data. Templating? State? Yeah. When is .NET 6 coming out? But I mean, yeah, I've been using .NET Core C# at work lately, so I just thought I'd build something simple on stream. Async, that's what we want. Okay, so we can have an async function. Whoa, look at that! You just have a wait right in there. That's pretty cool. I'll give it B tier for trying. All right, this is my list. I'm sticking to it. I mean, there's probably some changes I would make. I would say, like, at the end of the day, it all comes down to your own personal preferences. Obviously, I'm not going to speak for everyone when I talk about my opinions on all these things. But I do really, really like Vue Js. If you've seen some of my YouTube videos, you probably know why. I will point you to this. I don't think I did a good job explaining why I prefer Vue over specifically React. But if you look in the frequently asked questions on GitHub, there's specifically, why do you prefer Vue Js? And then I linked to 2 different streams where I think I actually did a pretty good job diving into the specifics of why I prefer one over the other. So I would say check that out if you really want to know more about that. Yeah, I feel like I just rambled a ton, but hopefully this was fine. Also, the fact that Svelte is the future, web components are the future. I think that's it. That's it. I probably took way too long. That took me way too long, but it was fun. It was fun to do. And thank you all for watching. Bye. Everybody say bye, YouTube. Is this done? Is this still a YouTube video? I don't know. Bye, YouTube. No, we have that content emote. Yeah.